Hello and welcome to The Understudy, the channel that teaches you everything you need to know about musical theater. My name is Philippa and today I will read from Broadway Musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows of All Time by Ken Bloom and Frank Vlasnik. To get the full version of the book, I recommend getting the physical copy as images and certain inserts from the book will not be displayed here. I do not own this material, I'm just reading from a place of entertainment and education, and I will not edit these audio recordings as I go, so you will get the unabridged version. Today I will start with Section A, starting with Annie the musical. It opened on April 21st, 1977 at the Alvin Theatre with 2,277 performances. It was produced by Mike Nichols, Erwin Mayer, Stephen R. Friedman, Louis Allen, Alvin Netherlander Associates Inc., the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, and Icarus Production. Music by Charles Strauss, lyrics by Martin Charnin, book by Thomas Meehan, music director by Peter Howard, and dance arrangements by Peter Howard, music orchestrated by Philip J. Lang, directed by Martin Charnin, choreographed by Peter Gennaro, scenic design by David Mitchell, costume design by Theoni V. Aldredge, lighting design by Judy Rasmussen. Synopsis. Orphan Annie brings joy to her fellow orphaned mates, though they are all kept virtually hostage by the mean and spiteful Miss Hannigan. Annie, meanwhile, meets the millionaire Daddy Warbucks, bringing joy into his life as well. Miss Hannigan plots evil things but is thwarted. Annie continues to bring joy to everyone, including the mutt, Sandy. Original cast. Grace Farrell, Sandy Faison. Rooster Hannigan by Robert Fitch. Miss Hannigan, Dorothy Loudon. Annie, Andrea R. McArdle. Oliver Daddy Warbucks, Reed Shelton. A Star to Be, Laurie McKeeman. Molly, Danielle Breeze-Boyce. Kate, Shelley Bruce. Lily St. Regis, Barbara Irvin, FDR, Raymond Thorne, Drake, Edwin Borgo, Bert Healy, Donald Craig, Sandy by Sandy. Oliver in Drag was what naysayers started it, but the Charles Strauss Martin Charnin musicalization of the Little Orphan Annie comic strip struck a chord with millions of prepubescent girls, and its anthem, Tomorrow, was their rallying cry. There was, of course, a proud tradition of comic strips adapted into Broadway musicals. The litany goes back to at least 1906 and Foxy Grandpa, and there was a very successful series of Mutt and Jeff musicals that toured the country, though they never came into New York. The importance of the funny papers in American life shouldn't be underestimated, with Irving Berlin's topical review As Thousands Cheer boasting a song titled The Funnies. During a newspaper strike, in a scene reenacted in the musical Fiorello, the New York City Major Fiorello LaGuardia reads the comics, including Little Orphan Annie, over the radio so kids and their parents wouldn't miss an installment of their favorite strip. In more recent times, there have been Broadway musicals suggested by the strips Superman, Lil Abner, and even Doonesbury, but by far the most successful comic strip musical of all time is Annie. The project started inauspiciously at the Godspeed Opera House in East Haddam, Connecticut. The reviews were not kind at all, but producers Louis Allen believed he had the germ of a gem of a show that could be developed further. He called in his friend Mike Nichols, who agreed to co-produce and become an uncredited artistic advisor. The results on Broadway were astounding given the poor reception at Goodspeed, receiving most rave reviews and going on a long run and many tours. A lot of the credit goes to the music of Strauss and the book by Thomas Meehan, not to mention the original cast, which included Andrea McArdle as the title character, a petite merman with the pipes of steel, and Broadway veteran Dorothy Loudon as Miss Hannigan, the piece's comic villain. Most importantly, Loudon provided a heart and humor behind the bluster, and audience members, especially the more cynical ones, deeply emphasized with her lament, Little Girls. The show was so successful that Charnin and Strauss attempted to make lightning strike again with two sequels, Annie 2, which closed out of town, and Annie Warbucks, which played off-Broadway to little acclaim. But the original Annie remains one of the most produced musicals of all time, with thousands of little girls belting to the best of their abilities its uplifting score. Dorothy Loudon. Dorothy Ludum, a singer-comedian whose reactions were often three-act plays in themselves, had a vibrant throb of a voice, a compulsion to please audiences, and the ability to turn her comic gifts on a dime into deeply affecting pathos. She became the comeback kid for the ages with her star-making turn as Miss Hannigan in Annie. After surviving the flops Nowhere to Go But Up, The Fig Leaves Are Falling, The Out-of-Town Casualty Lolita, My Love, and others. After Annie, she returned to the world of shows whose ledgers ended on debit side, albeit this time in a classy failure with her performance as Widow Bea Asher in Michael Bennett's Ballroom. After replacing Angela Lansbury with a wildly different yet entirely valid Mrs. Lovett in Sweeney Todd and a brilliant turn in backstage non-musical Farce Noises Off, she returned to the world of the flop with the review Jerry's Girls and yet another out-of-town fiasco, the sequel, Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge. Critics and audiences lamented her string of bad luck in shows that were unworthy of her great talent. Still, her comic creation of Miss Hannigan has never been equaled, and her performance of 50% in Ballroom ranks with Dorothy Collins' Losing My Mind and Helen Morgan's Bill as one of the greatest torch songs moments on the Broadway stage. Peter Gennaro. Peter Gennaro started out as a dancer in the chorus of Guys and Dolls and The Pajama Game. After an early choreography gig creating the spectacular White and Gold Ballet for Chita Rivera in the 1955 flop Seventh Heaven, he returned to performing with a supporting role in Bells Are Ringing. His enthusiasm gave the show's choreographer Bob Fosse the confidence to let Gennaro stage part of his show, stopping Muchacha dance with Judy Holliday. His talent and flair grabbed the attention of Bells director Jerome Robbins, who tapped Gennaro to be co-choreographer of West Side Story. Gennaro once again let his knowledge of Latin styles to Dance at the Gym and the Fiery Steps in America are largely his. The West Side's success to a busy career creating athletic, super high-energy dances for shows such as Fiorello, The Unsinkable Molly Brown, and Bajor, reuniting him with his old friend Chita Rivera. In Annie, his clever use of the ensemble in NYC, his high-kicking, bucket-wielding orphans, and the down-and-dirty bump-and-grind in Easy Street were vastly underappreciated, though they greatly helped the seamless flow of that show. Backstage, the music to Something Was Missing was previously used by Strauss as You Rat You from the film The Night They Raided Minsky. Bill Berloni found the original Sandy in a dog pound, saving his life and making him a Broadway star. Each succeeding Sandy was also rescued from the pound to live a life upon the wicked stage. Next musical, Annie, Get Your Gun, opened May 16th in 1947 at the Imperial Theatre with 1,147 performances. Produced by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II, music and lyrics by Irving Berlin, book by Herbert Field and Dorothy Fields, music director Jay Blackton, music orchestrated by Philip J. Lang, Robert Russell Bennett and Ted Royal, vocal arrangements by Joe Moon, piano arrangements by Helmi Krisa, directed by Joshua Logan, choreographed by Helen Tamiris, scenic design by Joe Milesiner, lighting design by Joe Milesiner, costume design by Lucinda Bellard. Synopsis: Annie Oakley, an uneducated hillbilly, proves her sharp-shooting mettle when Buffalo Bill's Wild West show comes to her hometown. She's soon hired for the show, but comes up against the ego of the star attraction, Frank Butler. Annie and Frank love each other, but their competitive nature keeps them apart. It's only when Annie remembers singing You Can't Get a Man with a Gun in the first act that she purposely loses a shooting match with Frank, thereby winning his heart. Cast: Annie Oakley by Ethel Merman, Frank Butler by Ray Milton, Chief Sitting Bull by Harry Belliver, Tommy Keeler by Kenny Bowers, Mary by Ellen Hanley, Little Jake by Bobby Hookey, Charlie Davenport by Marty May, Winnie Tate by Betty Ann Neiman, Cole W.M.F. Cody by William O'Neill, and Dolly Tate by Lee Penman. The road to Broadway is fraught with dangers, and the fact that despite the death of its original composer, Annie Get Your Gun became a smash hit and an amazing testament to the tenacity of its producers, Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein. By 1944, the songwriting team was established as a musical theater powerhouse based upon the previous collaborations, as well as the remarkable achievement of Oklahoma the previous year. Rodgers and Hammerstein decided to become producers not only for their own works but of the works of others, and their second offering in this capacity was to be a musical based on the life of the Wild West legend Annie Oakley. And the idea was originally lyricist Dorothy Fields, who brought the project to Rodgers and Hammerstein along with her brother Herbert as co-librettists. The plan was for Dorothy to write the lyrics and Jerome Kern to write the music. All fell into place, and Kern arrived in New York from Hollywood to begin work on the new show. Tragically, while walking in Manhattan, Kern suffered a fatal stroke. Despite their grief, Rodgers and Hammerstein approached Irving Berlin to write the most American musical. Berlin was reluctant to take over from Kern, even though the great master had not written any songs for the show. But after going away for a few days to think it over, Berlin returned with 5 songs. For the lead role of Annie Oakley, Ethel Merman was summoned, and she gave one of her most indelible performances, exceptionally well served by Berlin, who provided no fewer than 6 smash hit songs. On the flip side were totally subpar songs, Who Do You Love, I Hope, and I'll Share It All With You, written for the cliched secondary romantic couple in the newly minted Rodgers and Hammerstein musical theater formula. Surprisingly, Annie Get Your Gun wasn't revived on Broadway until 1966, when Richard Rodgers himself produced it for the Music Theater of Lincoln Center, starring, who else? Ethel Merman. Though she was 20 years older than her Frank Butler, Bruce Yarnell was young enough to be her, nephew. As soon as she opened her mouth to belt out doing what comes naturally, the audience forgot the quibbles about an October-April romance and became enthralled again with the power of La Merme. Second revival showed up on Broadway in 1999, starring Bernadette Peters, who seemed to make a little career detour playing roles originated by Merman. Her next Broadway appearance was in the revival of Gypsy. For this revival, Peter Stone decided to make the show politically correct, an unnecessary exercise in disembowelment that hurt the show greatly, as did his decision to add the ultimate plot cliché, a story within a story, and begin the proceedings with "There's no business like show business." A succession of replacement followed Peters with varying degrees of success, including soap opera star Susan Lucci, Charles Angel's Cheryl Ladd, and country singer Reba McEntire. McEntire earned raves from critics and audiences for his stage debut. Irving Berlin. Irving Berlin, composer of the most enduring popular songs of the 20th century, including White Christmas and God Bless America, also wrote the scores to many Broadway shows, from Watch Your Step in 1914 to Mr. President in 1962. He wrote for the Ziegfeld Follies and his own music box reviews, contributing hit after hit song. After As Thousands Cheer in 1933, he spent most of the decade in Hollywood writing scores for Alicia Faye and the team of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. He returned to New York with Louisiana Purchase in 1940 and composed and starred in the World War II review This Is the Army, stopping the show with his rendition of Oh How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning from his World War I review Yip Yip Yap Bang. Subsequently, he wrote his all-time greatest hit, Annie Get Your Gun, spinning off of more standards than any other Broadway show. They say that it's wonderful. The girl that I marry, I got lost in his arms, anything you can do, doing what comes naturally. You can't get a man without a gun. And the unofficial showbiz anthem, There's No Business Like Show Business, originally written by Berlin as a throwaway to cover a scene change. Revitalized by Annie's success, he continued with Miss Liberty and Call Me Madam, again for Merman, before taking a 12-year hiatus. The last song he wrote at the age of 78 that was performed on a Broadway stage was An Old-Fashioned Wedding for the 20th anniversary revival of Annie Get Your Gun, starring a 57-year-old Ethel Merman. Amazingly, he lived another 23 years, still composing but rarely seen in public. Herbert Fields. Lou Fields, famed comedian of the team Joe Weber and Lou Fields, and noted Broadway producer, was the father of 3 children, all of whom would distinguish themselves as writers for the musical theater. His daughter, Dorothy Fields, was Broadway's most successful female lyricist and librettist, while her brother Joseph wrote both musicals and play. The third offspring, Herbert, occupied his time as an eminent Broadway librettist. He began his career as a choreographer for the original Garrick Gaiety. During the production of that historic revue, he met Rodgers and Lawrence Hart, and together they wrote 7 Broadway musicals, including their first, Dearest Enemy, and A Connecticut Yankee. From Rodgers and Hart, he moved on to a long, fruitful collaboration with Cole Porter, resulting in another 7 shows. Their musicals together were timely, hilarious fare that included Merman vehicles, DeBarry Was a Lady, Panama Hattie, and Something for the Boys. In 1941, with the production of Let's Face It, Herbert began collaborating with his sister, Dorothy, and the high point of their 8 shows together was Annie Get Your Gun. They also turned out witty, character-driven libretti for Up in Central Park and Redhead, the first murder mystery musical. Backstage. During Love Life, the Adolph J. Lerner/Kurt Will musical, Ray Middleton would brace himself against co-star Nanette Fabray and squeeze when he had to reach a particularly high note. The bruised Fabray asked Middleton what he was doing, and he responded that he used the technique with Ethel Merman during the run in Annie Get Your Gun. Fabray showed that she was not built like the rock-solid Merman and didn't appreciate having her ribs broken. Irving Berlin based several of his song titles on those originally suggested by Dorothy Fields to Jerome Kern. After Kern's death, the song titles remained in Fields' script, and Berlin appropriated them to write some of the greatest songs of his career. Anything Goes opened on November 21st, 1934 in the Alban Theatre with 420 performances. It was produced by Wynton Freely, music by Cole Porter and lyrics by Cole Porter, book by Guy Bolton and P.G. Wodehouse, book revised by Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss, music arranged by Russell Brennett and Hans Balick, choral arrangements by Ray Johnson, staged by Howard Lindsay, dances and ensembles by Robert Altham, scenic design by Donald Onslager, gowns by Jenkins. Synopsis. Nightclub singer Reno Sweeney set sail on an ocean liner with heiress Hope Harcourt, Moonface Martin, Public Enemy 13, who yearns to inch his way up the scale to 1, Billy Crooker, who stows away to be close to Hope, Lord Evelyn Oakley, who is engaged to Hope, Elisha J. Whitney, Crooker's boss, who doesn't know his employee is on the ship, and some feds looking for Martin. Hilarity and romance ensue. Cast. Billy Crooker by William Gaxton, Reno Sweeney by Ethel Merman, Moonface Martin by Victor Moore, Hope Harcourt by Bettina Hall, Bonnie Latour by Vera Dunn, Lord Evelyn Oakley by Leslie Barry, Elisha J. Whitney by Paul Everton, Captain by John C. King, Mrs. Hadworth T. Harcourt by Helen Raymond, Babe by Vivian Vance. Anything Goes is yet another exemplary show that has survived great odds to reach the stage. In this case, it was problems with P.J. Wodehouse and Guy Bolton's original script concerning the merry adventures of passengers on a transatlantic crossing and the ship's subsequent sinking. Wodehouse and Bolton titled their show Hard to Get, and it went into production when on September 8, 1934, the liner Morro Castle caught fire and sank. More than 100 people losing their lives. Suddenly, the idea of a jolly shipwreck musical didn't quite seem so distinct. At a loss, producer Vinton Friedley created a new team of writers, Howard Lindsay and Russell Krause, to fashion a new script. The team, which would go on to become one of the most successful in theater history, kept the ocean liner sailing, but sank the sinking. A merry musical farce, Anything Goes, libretto, was mainly an excuse to bridge the spaces between Cole Porter's outstanding songs. It was Porter's score and Ethel Merman's history-making performances that propelled the show. Anything Goes contained a number of future standards, including You're the Top, I Get a Kick Out of You, Blow Gabriel Blow, All Through the Night, and the title song. Porter's work achieved great renown, with Time magazine stating, "So popular are the composer Porter's lyrics that it is now considered the smart thing to know them all by heart, to rattle them off loudly." Merman repeated her stage success on the screen in the first film version of the show, released in 1936. Unfortunately, Paramount omitted many of Porter's secondary numbers and interpolated lesser songs by lesser writers. Merman's co-star in the film, Bill Crosby, repeated the role in the second film version 20 years later. In this even more disappointing version, Mitzi Gayer, Jen Mayer, and Donald O'Connor joined Crosby. This time around, the Porter score received even less respect, with some third-rate Sammy Cahn and Jimmy Van Heusen songs added to drag down the proceedings. Critics and audiences embraced an off-Broadway revival in 1962, which resulted in an original cast recording on the Epic label. In 1987, Lincoln Center Theatre produced a revival starring Patti LuPone, who had the pipes to match Merman in volume but lacked the necessary diction, turning the witty lyrics into mush. The revival also featured a pointless libretto that hurried the proceedings along but didn't add much in the way of charm. Cole Porter. Cole Porter, the urban, worldly composer lyricist who hailed from the exotic locale of Peru, Indiana, was the epitome of soigné wit in the 1930s, transporting the downtrodden victims of the Great Depression with the glamour and fantasy of his songs. The plots of his shows were often silly, and his songs achieved a markedly higher level of sophistication than the books. In shows like Anything Goes, Jubilee, Red Hot and Blue, whose story revolved around the buttock burn from a waffle iron, don't ask, Leave It to Me, Dubarry Was a Lady, A Washroom Attendant Dreams He is the King of France, Panama Hattie, Let's Face It, and Something for the Boys, where Merman receives radio messages through her fillings. The songs were unmistakably Porter. From his cineast ballads Night and Day, Begin with the Begin, and Love for Sale, to delightfulest songs, full up-to-date references, and sometimes incredibly shocking double entendres that blissfully sailed over the heads of all but the most inside audience members. Let's Do It, You're the Top, the title song to Can Can. During this run of hits, Porter suffered an accident that changed the course of his life. After a horse fell on him, crushing both his legs, the story goes, he worked on the lyrics for At Long Last Love. Is it an earthquake or simply a shock? While waiting for help. After the failure of Around the World in 80 Days, directed by Orson Welles, the sets wouldn't even fit in the theater, the public decided Porter's career was over. But he returned after a 2-year absence from Broadway with his greatest work, Kiss Me Kate. After the revitalization of his career, he continued with more excellent scores, Out of This World and his second biggest hit, Can Can. His last Broadway score was for Silk Stockings in 1955. A virtual cripple, he endured constant pain and more than 30 operations, finally undergoing an amputation in 1957. Backstage, Ethel Merman's understudy was Vivian Vance, later Ethel Mertz on I Love Lucy. Reno Sweeney was based in part on the evangelist Amy Semple McPherson, hence the Blow Gabriel Blow number. Robert Russell Bennett. Robert Russell Bennett, the premier orchestrator of Broadway's golden age, worked on an estimated 300 Broadway shows, from Daffodil in 1922 to The Grass Harp in 1971. His choice of instruments to be used in a particular show, the voicing of instruments, i.e. who would play the melody or the counter melody, and even the composition of underscoring was unparalleled in his era. He orchestrated the songs of the greatest composers of the 20th century: Jerome Kern, George Gershwin, Cole Porter, Frederick Loewe, Burton Lane, and Arthur Schwartz. Best known was his work with Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II, where he made invaluable contributions to the musical atmosphere of Oklahoma, Allegro, Flower Drum Song, The Sound of Music. To think of the first notes of The King and I, Showboat, or Camelot, one realizes that Bennett's arrangements are absolutely crucial in transporting the theater goer to the 19th century Siam, A La Vie on Mississippi, or the mystical realm of King Arthur. Composer Burton Lane remembered visiting Robert Russell Bennett in his office. There Bennett sat, with a girl on one knee, radio blaring, while he blithely orchestrated one of Lane's scores. As Thousands Cheer opened on September 30th, 1933, at the Music Box Theater with 390 performances. It was produced by Sam H. Harris, music by Irving Berlin and lyrics by Irving Berlin, book by Moss Hart, music director Frank Torres, music orchestrated by Adolf Deutsch, Frank Torres, Ed Powell, Russell Wooding, and Helmi Cressa. Staged by Hazard Short, choreographed by Charles Wiedemann, scenic design by Albert R. Johnson, lighting design by Hazard Short, costume design by Verity and Irene Sharaf. Synopsis. In this living newspaper review, to borrow an idea from the WPA, headlines are illustrated through songs and sketches. The sections include the financial page, Rotogravure, Easter Parade, Broadway Gossip, The Weather, Heat Wave, Advice to the Lovelorn, The Funnies, Society and Headlines, Supper Time, and Not All for the Rise in China. The cast included Helen Broderick, Marilyn Miller, Clifton Webb, Ethel Waters, Jerome Cohen, Hal Ford. Irving Berlin was in many ways a contradictory talent. Of course, his career spanned nearly 60 years, so it's difficult to pigeonhole such an immense body of work. One show that stands apart from his others in tone and form is the review As Thousands Cheer. We all know Berlin, the patriot, the composer of God Bless America and This Is the Army. There is Berlin the romantic, exemplified by such songs as Always and What Will I Do? And although As Thousands Cheer contains such typical Berlin songs as Easter Parade and Heat Wave, there are surprises too, with a more incisive and critical thrust from the composer-lyricist. The show was conceived as a topical review, with each scene linked to a backdrop of a newspaper headline designed and lit under the auspices of director Hazard Short, one of the unsung geniuses of American theater. Berlin and Moss Hart scoured such contemporary news, making the evangelist and self-promoter Amy Semple McPherson, also satired in Cole Porter's Anything Goes with Merman's Blow Gabriel Blow, John D. Rockefeller, Barbara Hutton, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., John Crawford, and even Gandhi. But the number that caused all the commotion took place following a headline reading: Unknown Negro lynched by Frenzied Mob. The song was Supper Time. It personalized individuals and a segment of society largely ignored by Broadway sophisticates. Hart and Berlin were worried about the song's reception, but Ethel Waters recounted in her autobiography, My Eye is on the Sparrow, "When I was through and that big heavy curtain came down, I was called back again and again. I had stopped the show with a type of song never heard before in a review, and a number that until then had been a question mark." Ethel Waters, the first black star to have her name above the title of a Broadway show when such a thing was earned rather than contractual. Ethel Waters was also the first black performer to star on a Broadway in a racially mixed book show. Bert Williams, while a great black star, appeared only in the Ziegfeld Follies and never with his name above the title. Waters began her stage career in 1917, touring the black vaudeville circuits and singing blues and double entendre ballads. She graduated to Broadway in the early black musicals Americana, Blackbirds, and Rhapsody in Black, following her star-making performance singing Heatwave and the bold, wrenching Supper Time. As Thousands Cheer, she went on to appear at Home Abroad and Cabin in the Sky. Then it was on to Hollywood. Nightclubs, concerts, and plays, most notably A Member of the Wedding. In addition to her two Berlin showstoppers, Waters also introduced to Broadway audiences I'm Coming, Virginia, Till the Real Thing Comes Along, Cabin in the Sky, and Taking a Chance on Love. As she got older, she got religion and turned her back on her early wild years, still retaining the chip-on-the-shoulder attitude that was nurtured in the rough-and-tumble racist atmosphere of her youth. Backstage, Webb and Miller resented Waters' success and didn't want to share the curtain call with her. Reviews, Part 1. There are generally two types of musical reviews. The first consists of sketch and musical material written specifically for the show. The second builds an evening around already existing catalog of famous composer or lyricist. The roots of the original material review go back to the first Ziegfeld Follies in 1907. But that art form is now dead, a victim of the television variety show. The songwriter review is a relatively recent phenomenon, starting in 1966 with Off-Broadway's Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris. That show was so successful that it spawned many, many imitators, too many in fact. Since most songwriter reviews lack the theatricality and since the songs are taken out of context, staging ideas must be imposed on the songs. The result is like staged radio, usually populated with grinning, squeaky clean performers from the Up with People mold, though often one person of color is included to break the monotony. The best songwriter review ever was Ain't Misbehavin', exceptional in every element. The cast was made up of unique individuals of all shapes and sizes, each with a distinctive personality. The Fats Waller catalog was given a theatrical concept, not a plot per se, but in a point of view that expanded on the lyrics of the songs. Richard Maltby Jr.'s imaginative and offbeat staging kept the energy at a high level, and the show wasn't afraid to laugh at itself. Most songwriter reviews feature a preponderance of ballads, and gosh, they're fun to sing, but ballad after ballad, no matter how beautiful, gets boring. The Fats Waller catalog that formed the basis for Ain't Misbehavin' certainly had its share of wonderful ballads, but they were offset by its many tempo, humorous songs. Full of surprises and making for an exciting, delightful evening, Ain't Misbehavin' deservedly made stars of its indefatigable cast. Gregory Hines, a great triple threat star who left us much too early. Gregory Hines made his debut with his brother Maurice in the 1954 musical The Girl in Pink Tights. Having spent his childhood hoofing in nightclubs and on television with his father and brother as one-third of the high-energy act Hines and Dad, Gregory stayed away from Broadway until 1978, when he and Maurice returned after a 20-year absence as full-fledged stars in the revue Eubie, based on the music of the ageless Eubie Blake. The next season, he played Scrooge in the Harlemized version of A Christmas Carol, called Coming Uptown. And 2 years later, lent his taps, smooth vocals, and ingratiating presence to another revue, the elegant Duke Ellington's celebration Sophisticated Ladies, in which he co-starred with Judith Jameson and fellow tapmaster Hinton Battle and Greg Burge. Next came a career in films, including The Cotton Club, Running Scared, and White Nights, in which he traded steps and held his own with Mikhail Baryshnikov no less. It was on the screen that he proved himself to be a fine dramatic actor as well as a world-class souffler. After 10 years in Hollywood, Hines returned to Broadway as Jelly Roll Morton in Jelly's Last Gem and won a well-deserved Tony Award for his work as the haunted genius. His death in 2003 came as an utter surprise, for his talent, vitality, and great class made it seem as if he would be gracing our presence for decades to come. Beatrice Lillie. Although many thought she was British, the zany, irrepressible Beatrice Lillie was actually Canadian by birth. She had a truly submersive side, lurking just under the surface demeanor of a very proper lady. And audiences, and indeed many of her co-stars, never knew what Lillie would do next. Having spent her youth in the London music halls, she became a star in the revues produced by André Charlotte. Coming to the States in the 1920s, along with great friends Noel Coward and Gertrude Lawrence, Lillie's comic genius made her the toast of New York for over 30 years. In reviews such as At Home Abroad, 1935, The Show Is On, 1936, Inside USA, 1948, and The Siegfried Follies in 1957, where she had audiences on the floor with her sketch comedy, clowning as geisha girl and an airline hostess and a housewife shopping in a modern supermarket. Her last Broadway appearance was as the dotty, bike-riding, bunny-slipped clad Madame Arcady in the Broadway musical High Spirits, 1964. Oh, only her second book show. The other was She's My Baby in 1928. By the time she did the movie Thoroughly Modern Millie in 1967, she was exhibiting the early signs of Alzheimer's disease, which she would battle for the next 25 years. Forever known for her rendition of There Are Fairies at the Bottom of Our Garden, Lillie was one of the most insane, hysterically insane performers ever. Avenue Q opened July 31st, 2003 at the John Golden Theatre with 2,534 performances. It was produced by Kevin McCollum, Robert Goodman, Jeffrey Seller, the Vineyard Theatre, and the New Group. Music and lyrics by Robert Lopez and Jeff Marks. Book by Jeff Whitty. Musical director, Gary Adler. Music orchestrated by Stephen Oramos and music arranged by Stephen Oramos. Directed by Jason Moore. Choreographed by Ken Robertson. Puppets conceived and designed by Rick Leon. Scenic design by Anna Lewison. Lighting design by Howard Blinky. Costume design by Miranda Rada. Synopsis. On Avenue Q, somewhere in New York City, a bunch of 20-somethings from a community helping one another through the angst impending adulthood in the big city. Princeton is fresh out of college, broke, and rooming with Rod, a straight-laced Republican with sexual identity issues. Brian is an unemployed stand-up comic living with his fiancée, Christmas Eve. The rest of the gang include Nikki, a slacker, a teaching assistant, and sensitive soul named Kate Monster, a distinctly otherworldly internet-surfing character called Trekkie Monster, a former sitcom star Gary Coleman, the black superintendent of the dilapidated building where they all live. Making incidental appearances are Lucy T. Slut and the Bad Idea Bears. Some of the characters attempt to hook up, some come to realizations about themselves, and some just talk and sing about their dreams and aspirations. By the end, they all come to believe that if they keep striving, the future can be brighter for one and all. Cast: Mrs. T/Bear/other characters, Jennifer Barnhart. Kate Monster/TJ Slut/other characters, Stephanie D'Abruzzo. Ensemble: Jody Eichelberger, Brian, Jordan Gelber. Christmas Eve by Anne Harada. Ensemble by Peter Linz. Nikki/Trekkie Monster/Bear and other characters, Rick Leon, Princeton/Rod by John Tartaglia, Gary Coleman by Natalie Venetia Bell. This most current of musicals, featuring up-to-date language, characters, and sensibility, and even some puppet nudity and sex, reminds us, believe it or not, of a show almost 90 years old, Lou Leslie's Blackbirds of 1928. That show launched a string of all-black musicals and was the first jazz revue to feature major black stars, including Adelaide Hall, Bojangles Robinson, and Manton Moreland. In an era where the operetta still held sway on Broadway, Blackbirds brought the sensibility of uptown clubs such as the Cotton Club downtown. For that historic review, lyricist Dorothy Fields and composer Jimmy McHugh wrote, "I can't give you anything but love, baby." The song went on to become a standard, but it caused a mild sensation at a time when the word baby was used only to denote young black women. With the success of the song, Fields brought baby into the mainstream. Though her long career, right up until the final score for Seesaw at age 68, Fields continued to employ the slang of the day in her lyrics to great effect. Similarly, the writers of Avenue Q pulled their language directly from the zeitgeist. This skewed and twisted take on Sesame Street features everything from puppet promiscuity to a closeted gay puppet to a black woman playing Gary Coleman as a janitor, and songs such as "It Sucks to Be Me," "Everyone's a Little Bit Racist," and "The Internet is for Porn." Its freshness and its insistence on speaking to contemporary audiences in contemporary language are rare things for Broadway. Big may have had a few breakdancing moves and a couple of skateboards, but its creators thought they were being hip and current. Well, any kid could have told them the show was sweet but square. There have been some hits with a modicum or more of contemporary sounds. Bye Bye Birdie's rock songs truly sound like early hits of the period, and Hair was similar to Avenue Q in its musical and atmospheric authenticity and the sincerity of everyone involved. Hair's creators were expressing themselves in the only way they knew how, not attempting to co-opt and cash in on the blossoming hippie lifestyle. At least that's what they made us believe. Yet Hair provided Broadway audiences with a window to a different world, a world of free young people who sang about such things as sodomy and black girls, and casually doffed their clothes, making Broadway history in the process. The fact that Avenue Q is performed by very sincere, big-eyed puppets certainly helps to make it racy, controversial subject matter more palatable. Their gifted operators are right on stage with them, making no attempt to hide or disguise the fact that they are doing the singing and talking. But after a minute or two, this convention seems as natural as any aspect of traditional fourth wall theater. The fact that it is by turns howlingly funny and genuinely touching doesn't hurt either. The show has distinctly off-Broadway feeling, with its small cast, tongue-in-cheek demeanor, and small band, but it never feels too precious or chintzy for a Broadway stage. The creators of Avenue Q resolutely refused to follow the Rodgers and Hammerstein formula. Yet, amid all of its topicality, its playfulness, and its satire, the show's genuine heart shines through. That's rare, and that's what makes it work. That and the fact that the internet really is for porn. Puppets. Given the built-in fantasy and the necessary suspension of disbelief of musical theater, it's surprising that puppets haven't played a greater role in history. Avenue Q, a kind of demented version of Sesame Street, is certainly a leap ahead in this regard. The runner-up would have to be Carnival, in which the male lead can only express his feelings through his puppets, and the female lead, the naive Lily, has a true rapport with the characters he voices, coming to believe that they are living creatures. Our bronze medal for distinguished Broadway's puppetry would go to Flahooley, which featured a marionette named Clyde as a major character. FDR also made a stringed appearance. The Siegfried Follies of 1943, At Home Abroad, Hooray for What, The Sweet Smell of Success, Seussical, and A Year with Frog and Toad also featured puppets, but not as main characters. Such shows as It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, Baker Street, the 1974 revival of Candide and Pacific Overtures, all directed by Hal Prince, who would have thought, used puppets as miniature props rather than characters. Of course, the Little Shop of Horrors, Audrey II or Audrey II, was a major character, but that started off-Broadway. Little known fact, the reason that there's an intermission in the show is that so the puppeteer inside the big plant costume can grab a breath of fresh air.